We're already well behind schedule. My name is Wolfgang. I'm the ECP from Sweden.
And I'm Carolina Carvalho. I'm the ECP from Spain.
Yeah, this concept is very simple, but I just ask you, how does it work?
So we are presenting now the new applied projects, okay? And it's lots of people, so that's why they're not here. They'll be sit here. And it will be, the first part, the GTC coordinator will come up, and they are posing the questions. What are the key policy questions to be addressed by the specific objective one, by the applied research project? And they have just 3 minutes. Please be strict to the time. And afterwards, the lead partner of each project will come up and answer then how does your applied research project activity plan to give the answers to these police questions, okay? And then they have 5 minutes to do that.
And Carolina, are there any questions allowed now in the?
No questions allowed.
No questions
but
allowed.
Actually, at the end, it will be a poll, so you can start thinking about it. Which of the new applied research projects provide useful input for your work? So at the end of the activity, we'll present the answers.
Okay, then let's start.
All right. The first one, the first project to be presented is the financial instruments and territorial cohesion. So I invite Zintis Hermansson from GTC to pose the questions. And afterwards, Fiona Washley from the University of Strathclyde will come up and present the project. So go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to open the session and introduce our new applied research project on the financial instruments. And before I start, I want to clarify 2 things. Financial instruments, these are loans, guarantees, and other repayable instruments. So for some who are not maybe so familiar with the terminology, I just want to avoid the confusion. The other thing is that this project is not about financial instruments versus grants. So we want to see actually the interplay between these things. It's a new research for the ESPON, and the question is why we're doing it now. There are a couple of good reasons for that. In the past programming period, 25 member states used financial instruments. The financing has doubled, and also in the current programming period, there are practically no restrictions on when you can use financial instruments. As long as you can justify the use of them, you can use them basically. Also, there's a huge effort. Okay. There's a huge effort from the European Commission and the European Investment Bank in promoting the financial instruments. And as you might know, there's a platform called FI Compass, where you can find information about financial instruments. And there's a big hooray, let's go with the financial instruments. But actually, we have little knowledge about the spatial dimension of financial instruments. And that's why there are a couple of policy questions we want to know, we want to have answers to. The first is, what is the spatial distribution of financial instruments? Which regions are using the financial instruments? Which regions are not using financial instruments? So we are looking forward to some territorial maps. Secondly, it's about the value added of financial instruments, about the impact of financial instruments. So we want to see if they are working, so we want to understand why, and if they are not working, so we also want to understand why. And maybe it's related to governance issues, maybe it's related to spatial dynamics or some other issues. So we're looking forward to having answers to these questions. Also, I think there's in a bigger picture, there's a question about some policy recommendations towards the European Commission and the European Investment Bank, and we are looking forward for this project to have some, and I think that this is in a way a groundbreaking project because nothing like this has been done before, and I'll give now a word to Fiona to tell about more. more about this project.
Thank you very much, Zintis. Well, against this background, I want to say something about what is the big picture for this study. In fact, we do know some things about financial instruments. We know what the rationale for them is that the Commission, in particular, promotes. The idea that they're more sustainable than grants because the money is repaid and then can be spent again, invested again in the region. The second area where they can add value is claimed to be in the area of the quality of the projects, that recipients who have to repay the money maybe think harder about the kind of project planning that they undertake and the kind of investment they're going to do. Part of that is also the involvement of financial intermediaries in undertaking the due diligence on investments. And the third claim that's made in the rationale for financial instruments is that they're more efficient. They have the capacity to attract private money and so increase the leverage, and you get more bangs for your buck or euros for your euro by leveraging in private money. We also know quite a lot about the implementation difficulties with financial instruments. We've heard quite a lot of the experiences from managing authorities who, in spite of a lot of support from the Commission and through FICompass, have been through a steep learning curve. And we also know that the financial instrument landscape is highly complex. There are not only shared instruments through cohesion policy, but also EFSI money. There's a vast array of domestic financial instruments too that operate. So we have a real patchwork of measures that operate on the ground. But we know much less about the spatial distribution of financial instruments, about the allocations and the investments. Simply put, where are financial instruments spent, and how and to what extent does this differ from grants, and why? And we know even less about the value added that financial instruments can offer compared with grants or in combination with grants, and even less so in different territorial contexts. So how do financial instruments play out on the ground? What territorial factors influence how well financial instruments perform, especially in relation to their sustainability, project quality, or efficiency? What differences are there in the value added that they can offer? Our starting point is that the value added which financial instruments can bring is conditioned by a number of factors. Now, some of those are regional. They're things like the level of economic development reflected in eligibility for European structural investment funds, things like quality of government, which affects administrative capacity, things like the geography of finance, with peripheral regions tending to have more difficulty in accessing finance. Some are national issues, like national traditions and contexts in terms of financial institutions and structures. And this is going to be the heart of our analysis. So what do we think is innovative in this study? Well, we hope there'll be a lot of things, but I maybe highlight two. The first is that we hope to get a fine-grained understanding of where financial instruments are used and how. And this matters because, in our view, financial instruments have both the potential to contribute to cohesion and to exacerbate existing regional disparities. So this is an important question, and the information will be vital to understanding those patterns. The second is that we will develop typologies of regions based on a range of criteria relevant to financial instruments. We'll also identify within those where uptake is high or low, and understand why that should be and what the value added of financial instruments can be in different territorial contexts compared to grants. We already have some sense, some feel for what these patterns might be from the literature, but we're also going to be looking for the unexpected. So a number of our case studies will focus on outliers that are significant users of financial instruments to look at what works well, where it might be least expected, and why that might be. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, both of you. We going fast forward to the next project, which is green infrastructure and ecosystem services. And Michaela, you're starting your policy questions.
Thank you, Wolfgang. So yes, I'm going to briefly introduce you to the policy questions of the GRETA project. So you're going to become acquainted with this acronym GRETA. It's the project on green infrastructure and ecosystem services. Is the green button that I'm supposed to press here? Or? Okay. All right. So this project will work on the basis of a lot of existing research that is out there already, covering different aspects of green infrastructure and ecosystem services. But what we found, what was missing really was a specific territorial aspect or specific territorial angle from which this subject area should be analyzed. And this is why this project will be looking, obviously, as we always do with ESPON projects, at the existing spatial patterns at this moment. So we'll be looking at what green infrastructure is like in European regions and cities, how European regions and cities actually fare in offering access to green infrastructure and ecosystem services, and how they are meeting the demand for the different ecosystem services that are offered by green infrastructure. Then another aspect that will be dealt with by the project is the potential effects of green infrastructure and ecosystem services, both positive and negative ones, the effects on the territorial development of regions and cities. And also they'll be looking at the question how territories can most benefit of green infrastructure and ecosystem services. So how they can really make use of this development potential and integrate it ideally into their planning perspectives. Then also in this line of thinking, then it will obviously be important to know what kind of knowledge do policymakers and planners out there need to anticipate and to benefit from green infrastructure and ecosystem services, so that we're actually in a situation that we can also provide that evidence, or maybe further research is needed in order to actually get this knowledge that is needed. Then we want to know to which degree green infrastructure is also economically rewarding, particularly in a long-term perspective, and what policymakers could do to overcome maybe potential resistance that is out there when it comes to the further development or enhancement of green infrastructure, particularly in the private sector, and how maybe private actors can also be taken on board in the further development of green infrastructure. And then finally, we want to get answers on the question how green infrastructure can be further integrated in spatial planning and territorial development, and how public authorities, but also the private sector, can be supported to develop green infrastructure and to invest in ecosystem services. And with that, I pass on to Gemma now from Technalia. And she will explain to us how they are going about finding answers to these questions.
Well, thank you. Well, although Technalia is leading this project, it's equally joint developed by a great consortia. Some of the partners are here with us today. So basically, to answer the policy questions that Michaela was presenting, we have defined like a work plan with place-based approach and also policy-oriented kind of work plan. It's divided in 5 main tasks. We'll start by analyzing the spatial distribution of green infrastructure in Europe with a novel approach that, if I have time, probably I will explain a little bit more, sorry. This task is going to be undertaken by Space for Environment, our colleagues in Luxembourg, Once we've got this spatial distribution analyzed and we define some different typologies of regions in terms of the green infrastructure they've got, we move to an analysis of the ecological, social, and economic benefits for and demands, benefits of and demands for green infrastructures in those regions to cope with territorial challenges. And this is going to be undertaken by the University of Barcelona in Catalonia, and some colleagues are here today. And the analysis is going to be also completed by an analysis of the economic methods for valuation of demand, in particular of green infrastructures. So the economic side is also be analyzing here. And then in parallel, we are going to analyze the policy, strategies, planning decisions, and also governance structures that may enable or constrain the implementation of green infrastructures in different territorial, let's say, realities. And our colleagues in Norwegia, in Sweden, they are going to analyze this at national level, and they are going to create national fact sheets analyzing these aspects, enable factors or constraints, conditions for implementation. Case studies, which is led by Technalia, is one of the core elements of our work plan. We are going to analyze 12 case studies with more or less European coverage, trying to analyze from a urban level towards, we've got even a macro region, to try to analyze different realities, validating the outcomes of our research, but also getting the possibility to analyze in detail some aspects that at European level is not possible to address. And then we finally end up with kind of a policy messages or policy guidelines on how policymakers could better or successfully implement green infrastructures considering our results. And then I would like to highlight only the two different elements in our work plan. One is the novel approach in analyzing the spatial distribution on green infrastructures. We are going to combine a top-down approach, which uses basically Red Natura 2000 as a backbone and connecting natural and semi-natural areas attached to them. So we embrace the concept of networking or network and connectivity. And on the other side, we are going to use a bottom-up approach in which we identify the multifunctional ecosystem services attached to the infrastructure itself, making use of MICE report and the outcomes of other projects. And then the second element of innovation will be the use of an advisory group that would help us invalidate our results and also make our policy recommendations more useful and applicable in the real life. And thank you. I think that's all.
Thank you, Michaela and Gemma. The next project we presented will be circular economy and territorial consequences. So I invite Marian to present the police questions, and then Carlos Tapia will follow answering how to complete that questions.
Yes, thank you. Currently, our economy operates mainly on a take, make, and dispose model. And this is a linear model where every product is bound to reach its end of life and then thrown away. This all, however, leads to a growing pressure on the world's resources and environment. A circular economy model, this one, aims to reuse, repair, refurbish, recycle, upcycle existing materials and products by turning waste into a resource. And with that, our resources should be used in a more resource-efficient way so that the economy stays within our planetary boundaries. Also, this topic is of high interest on the policy agenda, and questions that are specific for ESPON are, for example, what does the circular economy actually mean for a territorial perspective? What territorial factors influence the development towards a circular economy? and what territorial characteristics make regions and cities more or less optimal to support the circular economy. In addition, it is relevant to know what material patterns and flows look like in European regions. Material patterns and flows, including the patterns and flows of resources and waste. And what have they changed? How have they changed over the past 10 years in the different types of European regions and cities? At the moment, various approaches already exist to implement a circular economy. Approaches such as industrial symbiosis, clustering, territorial connectivity, energy efficiency, smart logistics, but also the sharing economy. But how do these approaches affect different types of regions and cities in Europe? Do they, for example, affect capital cities differently than secondary growth poles? And what is the potential of European regions and cities for implementing the circular economy? What kind of actions and policy is needed in what type of regions and cities to ensure a smooth transition to circular economy and a circular lifestyle? How these questions are being answered by the project will now be answered by Carlos.
Thank you, Marion. Okay, I wish I could answer already all these questions. The kickoff of this project was held 3 weeks ago, so I'm sorry. I'm afraid I will not be able to answer right now. But what I can do is try to answer or to explain what is the approach of the project on all these issues. So basically, there are, in terms of circular economy understanding at the territorial level, there are 3 main challenges, which is lack of data at regional levels regarding materials and also waste production, lack of understanding of the territorial implications of the circular economy, just what Marjan was mentioning before, and lack of knowledge and guidance by the policymakers at these subnational levels in terms of how to actually contribute to circular transitions. So the approach of our project is based on a twofold top-down, bottom-up approaches, which goes beyond the case studies, because we will also be producing regionalized data by disaggregating Eurostat data sets, which is a top-down approach, but also by analyzing more granular information from regions themselves. So then we will approach this analysis using systems thinking. I will say something more about this later on. And also stakeholder involvement using our own networks. That means that we have a network of regions and cities in our project as well, which will help us to actually engage more closely with cities and regions. The outputs of the project will be a longitudinal analysis of regional patterns and waste flows, 3 in-depth urban metabolism analysis. We will contribute to enhance to a better knowledge of the territorial elements of the circular economy, of course, or to provide guidance to local and regional policymakers. So in the end, eventually, the impacts that we expect to achieve is better knowledge on the actual material and pattern consumptions and waste production patterns at regional levels, a new territorial perspective for European regions based on a deeper understanding on the territorial factors that actually influence circular economy transitions at regional and local levels, and increased capacity of local policymakers on these aspects. And this is a very brief overview of the systems thinking elements that will be included in our project. You can see there 2 causal loop diagrams that are used to actually try to understand how the different elements of the economic system on the graph to the right can contribute to actually deliver different results, different outcomes in terms of circular economy. This is a generic causal loop diagram, but the good news is that it can be adapted to each of the regional typologies that will be considered in the project. And to the left side, you just have a similar kind of diagram that has been built to try to explain the overall approach of this specific project in terms of this system thinking analysis. So basically, the systems thinking causal loop diagrams are based on reinforcing and balancing loops that can be intervened, that can be acted upon to actually try to unleash different outcomes from these interventions. And those outcomes will be also impacting other elements of the systems, not only the specific loop that is being dealt with. So that is all from our side, and I hope to come back here in some months' time and answer with data all these policy questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You sure will come back, I guess. Thank you very much, both of you. The next project is about youth unemployment, territorial trends, and regional resilience. Peter, you're going to introduce and asking the policy questions, followed by Andrea Bob from the Icon Institute, which will give us some answers already today. Thank you.
Thank you, Wolfgang. Yes, youth unemployment. One of the most severe consequences of the global financial crisis has been the enduring, rather relatively high unemployment in Europe. And in particular, if we look at the case of youth unemployment. In 2015, almost 4.5 million young people, here defined as between 15 and 24 years, were unemployed. And if you bear in mind also that increasingly the young people that are working are facing low-quality jobs, low-wages jobs, short-time contracts. And undoubtedly, this has severe, serious structural implications for Europe and the regions and the cities. And not surprisingly, the European Union has introduced a lot of policy initiatives to try to encounter these challenges. And as the flagship initiative, the Youth Guarantee stands out, and which is a way, it was introduced a few years ago, and it's a way to support countries, member states, and regions in ensuring that young people that get good quality jobs within 4 months after they finish their education or they have become unemployed. So it's against this background that we have taken the initiative to launch a project on youth unemployment. I should not have 2 green buttons. Okay, so the key policy questions that the team should try to address and answer is what territorial patterns and trends of youth unemployment can be identified in Europe and its regions. To what extent can levels of youth unemployment be linked to regional resilience, policy frameworks, and governance structures? How is ESIF supporting youth employment creation? What are the good practices among European regions in promoting youth employment and achieving the Youth Guarantee goals? And finally, how can good practices be transferred to other regions, and how can cohesion policy be further strengthened to support long-term structural reform aimed at strengthening youth unemployment? And like the previous project, this is very new, and it was kicked off in October, and we deliver its inception report in 2 weeks' time. So, floor is yours, Andrea.
Thank you. As Peter pointed out, youth unemployment is a major concern throughout the EU, and our project has therefore decided to look at it from a temporary perspective as well as a current perspective. So we are looking at data from the year 2000 until 2016. This captures the period before the financial crisis itself in 2008, which has led to the drastic increase in youth unemployment, and the follow-up of the crisis, thus allowing us to track the evolution at regional level of youth unemployment together with the impact of all the policies taken to fight youth unemployment. The quantitative data we will collect pertains not just youth unemployment, but also all the factors which influence it, economic factors, social policies, and the context in which regions operate, which can be a bit complex to analyze, as the data, of course, is difficult to distinguish cause and effect when you look at that much of a context. Qualitative data, of course, will be very important, exactly to fight against extreme amounts of quantitative data we might collect, and which could confuse results. An approach to analyze this data will be to develop typologies of regions when it comes to youth unemployment. These typologies will respond to the ESPON needs as well as to our needs when it comes to recommending good practices or recommending or even identifying similar regions, both in the problems they face when it comes to youth unemployment and in the actions they take against it, and allowing them to identify themselves and identify their common players in the same field. We are looking at factors that are linked to youth unemployment, drivers, determinants, and the impacts they have, and this will be will form a basis of our research approach. Of course, we are going to also undertake 10 case studies, which will allow us to show the in-depth case of 10 regions selected in the process we are developing now, and which we will propose in our inception report based on a statistical analysis of the data we collect. The key result of the project will be to provide recommendations on how the EU cohesion policy can be better mobilized to support the Youth Guarantee and the Youth Employment Initiative. This will be the recommendations at the end of our study. Regarding the innovative elements that we put forth with our project, it will be a mix of quantitative and qualitative research methods, which we are designing at the moment, and which we plan to propose in our inception report, so they are not yet approved, and I will not present them at this occasion. We will be using statistical analysis mainly because it will allow us to work with the data of NUTS 3 regions throughout the EU and to identify cause and effect at local level. Regional specificities and their impact on youth unemployment will be one of the major added values of this research project, because youth unemployment in itself is, of course, a topic of great research interest, being a problem that EU acknowledges since years. So the regional aspect, the factors which influence youth unemployment in a region, and which, of course, will be identified in our data collection, will be one of the major outputs and will be presented in our mapping. The comparative approach of our project is mostly based on the very complex team of experts, a team of labor market analysts, statisticians, and economists, which will be able to bring to the table multiple perspectives on youth unemployment and be able to accurately criticize each approach in order to define an analysis method, which will bring us valid results. Overall, regional resilience to youth unemployment, we hope to be able to define main categories of regions and their resilience patterns. We are asked to make some policy recommendations, and for the European Structure and Innovation Funds, and we do hope to be able to do so based on our results. Thank you.
Thank you. We invite Sandra De Viaggio to present the next project, Territories with Geographical Specificities, followed by Eric Larson from Spatial Foresight.
So, good afternoon. So this project is about territories with geographical specificities. I mean, you have listened from the Maltese presidency, their topic, their priorities on this topic. There is already a lot of studies from the European Commission dealing with this topic, the European Parliament. So I can promise to you that this project is not about data collection. It's not about delineations, because we have enough for that. It's not about nuts, but it's a lot about case studies. And so we'll have 15, possibly plus 5 case studies. We are looking only at certain types of territories, in particular sparsely populated areas, islands, including island states, mountain areas and coastal areas, and integrated in the concept that we need place-based approaches, that territorial cooperation can play a role in relation to territories with geographical specificities, in particular in the relation with the surrounding areas. We set up the framework for this project. And I can promise that we have the best team. So Eric will introduce you how to do it, and has PST members. So from the monitoring committee since the beginning, we have Norway, we have Malta, and we have Cyprus. As main policy questions, we'll be looking at the concept, what... Okay, thank you. We'll be looking at what insularity, what remoteness, and some characteristics that are common to these types of territories mean. We'll be looking at the impact that these have on competitiveness, of quality of life, of sustainable growth, but also how this has changed over the time and which territorial development trends can affect it. Then we'll look at how public intervention can really play a role and where is required, and then how these place-based integrated approaches can also play a difference. Finally, looking at territorial cooperation, we'll try to see how territorial cooperation can improve the capacity of local and regional authorities, and very much in line what Eric explained before, what is this capacity building and facilitation. But as I said before, the relation with surrounding territories, and very much on the logic of the functional approach. But I'll give the floor to Eric.
Thank you, Sandra, for this very complete introduction. Yes, indeed, we are not going to work on delineations. We're in a very fortunate position to have delineations already. Sorry, I can't see. There it is. Yes, and why you talk? We're not going to work on nuts, you mentioned. Yeah, why is that? Some say that nuts is a very pragmatic, reasonable way of delineating these areas. Well, we'd argue that they make you blind and powerless. Because what is interesting about these areas is precisely the relational perspective. Mountains to Piedmont areas, an island and archipelago to mainland. If you look at the nuts, you've already included the neighborhood. You can't act anymore. So no, we need to insist on this local, on the delineation based on Law 2 areas and working from there. The other important starting point is to say that these areas are specific but not handicapped. There, maybe we have a small issue with the treaty there, but well, we'll have to deal with that. We're saying that, well, if you remember these areas, if they're depopulating, it means at some stage people were actually moving into these areas. What generates social and economic issues is that they are per se handicapped then. It is that they do not, in relation to a prevailing market system, in relation to a prevailing production system, in relation to a prevailing institutional system, they generate some certain types of issue. So it's in this interaction that you have issues emerging. It's not because these areas would be per se less worth than other regions. So that's important. Then distinguishing geographic specificity and objective constraints seems important to us. What do we mean with objective constraints? It's lack of critical mass, it is remoteness, it is peripherality. The debate has often gone like, oh, islands are peripheral, or mountain areas are remote from. Well, if you start saying that, everything gets confused, because we know we have some mountain areas in the Alps that are very close to metropolitan areas. We have some islands like Sicily that have many issues, but they are definitely not missing critical mass. They have 5 million inhabitants. So we need to distinguish this to get a clearer debate. And then we boil down to a much more limited range of issues. The issues for mountain areas typically would be farming and forestry. They would relate to biodiversity and nature protection. They would be linked to climate change and maybe to sustainability linked to certain forms of winter tourism. So we restrict the number of issues and try to get it really an understanding of what is really linked to mountainousness. I could run the same debate then on insularity, which is not a peripherality, it's something different. We argue that geographic specificity is primarily a multi-level territorial governance issue, which brings me back to my previous presentation on soft cooperation. These is areas that are subunits usually of regions or going across regions. We now have an alpine macro-regional strategy. Typically, then around the geographic specificity, you build something transnational, but you also have, we have mountain valleys, we have mountain components of regions, mountain components of country. We need to build this governance at different levels. And this also implies that their needs, their specificities are different. What makes these areas what gives them the need to formulate a specific policy is that they function in somewhat different way. They have different challenges, and this implies that their evidence base will be different from other areas. So we are going to collect data, but not just pan-European. We need to give the regions the tools to formulate, to make their case in the wider context of why they are functioning in a different way. So we will be then focusing on taking into account on which policy processes we can fit into. So where, in what sectoral policies can we really have an input of saying you could become more efficient, you could have a better policy if you understand how your policy impacts specific types of territories, how it has a different effect than what you could foresee in these areas. We would like to give the local authorities, regional authorities, methods and tools to make their case on saying, well, your issue is not that you are peripheral, it's that your transport connection for an island functions differently. And this is not done with accessibility maps, as ESPON has produced them traditionally. It's made with a real understanding of how you negotiate the subsidies or the public service obligation for the transport connection. We will propose alternative ways of dealing with data at European level. So it's not about benchmarking, because comparing these with the same benchmarks defined for metropolitan areas or defined for mainstream regions, as we'd call them, does not make sense. We need to make the case of what makes them specific. And we would like to provide guidance on the governance of specificity from sub-regional level to macro-regional. So these different levels, that they are embedded in different levels of governance, and these need to function in interaction with each other and interaction with established regions, national authorities, and European level. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right on time. Very interesting. And now we're coming to the very, very last project, which is introduced by Martin Gauck. And it's called The Impact of Refugees Flows to Territorial Development in Europe. The researcher following is Manuela Samek-Lodovici, I guess.
Thank you and good afternoon. And the debate surrounding the inflow of asylum seekers and refugees is remaining high on the policy agenda. This also has been reflecting in the works of ESPON over the past few years. Perhaps you remember we published a policy brief on this subject 2 years ago when we had an ESPON seminar in Luxembourg, because it was this topic was very important during the Luxembourg's presidency, and we followed up this analysis again during the Dutch presidency when we discussed the urban partnership. So we complemented a little bit this analysis, but so far, we haven't been able to explore this issue on the territorial level that it matters the most. We haven't been able to go beyond, let's say, the national level. So this time, we hope that we will manage to shed some light on the flows of the asylum seekers and refugees on regional and urban level. This project will also focus a lot on the issues of integration. We will explore the profiles of the asylum seekers and refugees, but also we will explore the different policy responses that have been put in place to tackle this subject. So we are looking at what kind of challenges and the regions and cities are facing, and also trying to see what are the best practices that have been put in place so far. With that said, I'll give the floor to Manuela, who will talk in more detail what is going to happen. But I just have to say that this project is very fresh. We are still, let's say, planning the date for the kickoff. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, we just knew a couple of weeks ago that we got this project, so we still have to see with the ESPON referent how to design in a more detailed way this research. As it was anticipated, the main issue is to start to collect territorial evidence on how asylum seekers and refugees are distributed at the regional and local level, and not only at the national level. And here the big problem is that there are very little data available. So what we will have to do to this end will be to collect information of what is collected in each country at the regional and local level, and see where the gaps are, how comparable these data are, and how can we use them to do this sort of mapping. Another important issue here is that asylum seekers and refugees do not usually stay where they arrive. So there is a big difference between arrival areas, where the first immediate humanitarian aid has to be provided, and then where these people go, either when they're still waiting for the result of their application, or when they got a refugee status. And here there is another important distinction, because usually asylum seekers do not have the right to work, at least as long as they get the application defined, or in some countries they can start working under some conditions, while refugees, recognized refugees, have the right to work and to access the same type of services as natives. So there are big differences, and so it is important to assess the dimension and the localization of asylum seekers and refugees across the country. Another important issue is the profile of asylum seekers and refugees. And here there are again big differences. It is now emerging from the literature that usually refugees have higher qualification levels than other economic migrants, so they could provide inputs and support local development where they stabilize, but they need, of course, important integration policies. But it takes very long. According to the economic literature, it takes about 20 years before full integration. So if we want to assess the contribution of refugees or asylum seekers to local development, it is very important to consider the long time of this integration process. And so we need to consider both short-run cost and benefits and long-run cost and benefit, because they are very different. And of course, they are very different across location. In arrival or transit areas, there are only the short-run cost and very little benefits. in the destination countries. There are also long-run costs with integration policies, but there could be also a long-run benefit in terms of contribution. So it is a really complex issue. And another important issue here is the role of the different level of government, because this is a clear case where the European Union can have a very important role. And it has been having a very important role with its, for example, with relocation policies, which are accepted by some countries, but not by some others. So how could the European institutions support a better distribution and a better contribution of refugees and asylum seekers at the local level? How we are working? Well, we are going to put together, again, as in the other project, both qualitative and quantitative methodologies to gather the data. As I said, we will consider both Eurostat data, but also administrative data collected at the national and local level through the work of country experts that will interview local and national administration in our 12 case studies. We will also derive some profiles of areas where asylum seekers and refugees are arriving or staying using a cluster analysis. We will also do a policy analysis of the policies that have been implemented at in different areas at different stages of the refugee arrival, transition, and integration process through, as I said before, 12 case studies, mainly focused on areas in the Balkan and Mediterranean routes, which are the ones that are the one more used in this period. And then there will be this analysis of the territorial impact of these inflows to the EU. And here we will use this impact chain model and try to assess the different cost and benefit in the short and in the long run in different areas, arrival, transition, and destination areas. And finally, we will develop also a scenario analysis to see what could be the impact of a new relocation policy of the EU on the situation in different areas at the regional and local level. So see what's happened if nothing changed, what could happen if there is a change in the EU relocation policy, and we will have different policy option. And then at the end, the idea, as with the other project, is to derive some policy recommendation, but also guidelines for regional and local institutions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for all the very important key police questions and the interesting proposals as well. We hope we can see some results next seminars, and it will for sure generate nice discussion. Now it's time for you to work. Please, if you can open your Slido. There is a poll there. Now that you have heard all the projects, to select which of the new applied research projects provide useful inputs for your work. You can vote more than one. Okay.
Have you done your work here? During the time, I would like to inform you that the gathering for the social activities, which we are waiting for very much, I guess, is at 6 o'clock in the lobby. So don't forget it.
I have 15 minutes.
75 perhaps. I guess we have enough of data for making some observations. You see the results here. Green infrastructure ecosystem services is in the lead. Whatever that means, I picked something else. No, they're quite equal, I guess. Yeah. I guess someone else taking care of these results. Thank you very much, all of you, to have stayed as long as till now, and give our colleagues which had the last presentations a big hand if you would like to.